All right. Perfect. All right. So, welcome to the first of what I hope is what will be a really exciting series where we're going to share Teaching with Comics, the Facebook page, YouTube, with educators, with librarians moving forward through the rest of the year. So we'll still hear from artists and creators and authors, but I think it's super important for all the awesome educators that are out there that we learn from one another. And so I'm really happy to bring with us for the initial one, Deborah Benjamin. Yeah, so great to have you. And she is a high school English teacher. I'm a high school social studies teacher. And what I want to hear about when we talk tonight is her modern graphic novel education course. These courses that just were not around when I was in school. And I actually can't get one in my own district. I think a lot of times we just need that permission. We need to keep pushing that word out there about the things that we do. Deb, if you wouldn't mind, say hi, and if you want to share where you are on social media. And then I'm always curious, it's always that great question, what's your origin story? How'd you get into comic books? Was it later in life? Did you just, like me, just start reading basically out of the womb? Like, what's your origin story with comics and your background with reading them?
Well, so first of all, I am on TikTok. I haven't done anything in a while. My son is really pushing me to go get back into it again. So we'll be doing that probably this summer. The Buzz with Mrs. B. I'm also, of course, on Instagram as the same. It's just the same content. And hopefully in the near future, getting a YouTube channel up with lengthier things. And let's see, I think that's it as far as social media. I'm on, Twitter and all those as well, but The Buzz with Mrs. B. And let's see. So first off, my origin story, I guess. I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and I grew up watching, the Super Friends. And I grew up watching Linda Carter as Wonder Woman. And I would go out in my yard and I would spin around with my jump rope all lassoed up, and act like it was my lasso and spin around, and I'd run in slow motion, wah, 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 in the jumping. And I had this little neighbor boy that lived down the street. He was actually younger than me, but he had all the cool toys. He had like all the GI Joes, and he was an only child. All the Star Wars. I'd never seen Star Wars. I never really saw anything. I just, watched Wonder Woman and Super Friends and all the cartoons and Thundercats and Care Bears and Snorkels and all those too. But
Oh, the Snorks.
the Snorks, yes.
Yeah.
Nobody knows those. So I'm always excited when somebody knows about the Snorks. They were like the underwater Smurfs.
Yes.
The 80s were weird. But yeah, I just Aquaman, Wonder Woman from Super Friends, man, I shipped that. I thought they were gonna get together. But no, that's kind of where it started. We didn't really have I came from a really small town, and we didn't, and growing up I didn't really have, I was very sheltered in my growing up. I read a lot of there were these illustrated classics called Moby books that my mom would buy from like our Palmyra store. And I read like Tom Sawyer and all the classics, but like every other page was this illustration. And I just loved it. And I ended up loving the classic works. And so just love of reading. And it wasn't really until after I got married. My husband was a big comic book collector, and he sold all of his comics and his motorcycle to follow me. But when we got married, we met this guy who was a big comic book collector, and he'd bring his stuff over and we'd read. And I got hooked on the 90s JLA stuff where Batman punches the Green Lantern, and it was funny, and Martian Manhunter was always eating Oreos, and and so we started collecting. I started collecting then, and then we befriended our comic book guy who did our pull list. And I worked for him on Saturdays so he could have a day off for comics during the huge Pokemon thing. So I learned all this stuff about Pokemon when it first came out. And that's kind of where it started. And then it seemed like everything I collected got canceled. So my husband teases me that I am the destroyer of comic worlds. Cross-gen, that was me. I destroyed that universe by collecting it. So, but that's how it started. Yeah.
So you worked in a comic book store.
Yeah, for just on Saturdays, just helped bag and
wow. Yeah, our comic
just
book
to
store.
just to give the dude a day off so he could, be with his family. So
Our comic book
I had to pay
store.
for those comics somehow.
Right,
I was
right.
a college student.
Our comic book store was in between managers, and they actually offered me the job of being the manager of the store. My son was like,
Oh.
"Yes." I'm like, "No, like,
No,
we
no.
no, we need the teaching gig, right?" Like, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you mention that because he left. So, my kids grew up with Eric from Brave New Worlds, and we saw him once a week, every Wednesday. Like that's what we did. We go to the comic book store.
Yeah.
It's why my kids love to read so much. And then he left and went to Texas for a little bit and just came back, and it was like somebody coming home. Like it was just that
Mhm.
feeling when you heard his voice, and it's amazing that. And I say it to people all the time: if you haven't been to a comic book store ever or in a long time, it's a lot different than it used to be in the 80s. It's a lot more diverse. Although in your case, girls worked there. At my comic book store, you never saw a girl growing up.
Yeah.
But it's a whole
It was
different
like,
world now,
what? That's
right?
kind of like on Big Bang. What? Was
That's
that
right.
a woman?
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. And then like you're talking about all those things, about all those that you're very passionate about. I mean, you're smiling about it, you're laughing about it.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Like, and that's what the Marvel universe, I think, has done for us is kids are so excited about all these things now. And so now I'm like, okay, so you watch the movie, or in this case, American Born Chinese, right? Which is
Oh,
Disney Plus.
yeah.
And so I get to say to my students in my classroom, here, read the book. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's the hook. And then you
Yeah.
can use that to learn about all these other things. And just to hear you and I talking about these things, I mean, your background, my background, like
Mhm.
it's all that stuff. And our kids share those same passions. So that's fantastic. So then talk about that personal love and then translate that into your classroom. Just talk a little bit about the impact of comic books. And I guess we should say, I always use comics to mean sequential art, visual literacy. So it
Mhm.
can be a graphic novel, it can be a comic book. Those who read these things a lot, we use those words interchangeably, but for
Yeah.
people not to be confused, all those things together. But kind of talk about the impact of those in your classroom, and maybe even a little bit about, and we could probably talk about this for hours, but the benefits of what you've seen of using comics in your classroom.
Well, one of the biggest benefits I've seen was, and it goes back to, you mentioned American Born Chinese. And so I remember reading that it was like one of my education classes, which kind of just, it was a young adult lit class. It was required reading. And I picked it up and I was just like, this is so cool. Like I mean, it made me a huge Gene fan. Like I was just like was buying all of his stuff. But it was just I loved how the three stories like came together, and the mythology of the Monkey King and everything. And I remember giving it to I was a para at the time, a para educator, and I was going to teaching school. I'd already had another degree, but I was, changing things up. And I remember giving it to kids, and they were reading them, and they were just like, "This is the first book I've read like all the way through," And I was like, "Well, here, do you want more?" And I'd find something. I'm like, "How about this one? How about this?"
Right.
And just really seeing the impact that it had, and then also realizing that, like, I didn't realize that that not everybody sees the images in their head when they read, that there are people out there. And it was a big shock to me. It's like almost like 50% of the population too, that don't have the movie playing in their head. my son is one of those. And one day he was just telling, we were just talking about it. He's like, when I read, all I read is the words. I don't see anything. And there's nothing. All I see is words. And I was like, that I'm so sad for you. But he goes, but if I read a graphic novel, I can see the action, I can see the people, I can make those connections. And so I said, man, if only there was a way to have a class where I, if I could choose any class I could teach where I could incorporate these things in there, why not? And so that's kind of where the birth of the idea of this class started, was while I was in teaching school, and I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to do like a whole semester, or even it'd be really cool to do a whole year, but give me a semester and I can do a ton of stuff with that, just with graphic novels. So but just that whole part of giving kids an option, reading comics is reading. I mean, I have the t-shirt, everything, but just exposing kids to stories and to literature, great literature. I see you have the Scarlet Letter manga version back there on your thing, and there's all these classics that have been adapted, and all of that. So I think just giving kids that option of knowing that there are things out there that you can read, that it's intellectual, it's not low grade stuff.
And that text to text comparison, like that's
Right.
That's the language, the edu speak that gets us there. So if you wouldn't mind, and I didn't think about this question ahead of time. So with the course that you teach, was this a new course? Did you have to pitch it? Like, how did you go about getting that, if you don't mind talking about that?
Yeah, it's a new course. It was a new course. I had to pitch it. I pitched it for 3 years. Um, my first 3 years of teaching, I was like, hey, you know, how about a graphic novel class? How about, just another elective? You guys say we don't have enough electives, so I could teach one, and they were having me teach this American novel class, which I thought it was okay, but it was a junior senior level class, mostly seniors, and it was the American dream kind of thing. And I'm like, why couldn't we just do this instead? And they were like, no, why don't you wait, or talk to your department about it and see what they have to say about it, and is there a need, are there standards we're not covering? And I was just like, well, you know what, I don't know. I mean, like, okay, I understand it's my first year. Oh wait, second year. How about my graphic novel class? I just kept bringing it up, and I gathered, like, oh, there were several people. I can't even I want to say Hyde is the last name. Derek Hyde,
Oh,
maybe.
Derek Hyde, yeah, he's
Yeah.
in California.
He sent me a bunch of stuff because he was trying to promote it too, but I don't think he ever got very far with that either. He was like, let me know if it works. And I honestly got very, very lucky, because the administrator I had at the time was he didn't make me, I didn't have to pitch it to my school board. So
Wow.
which is really, really lucky. That doesn't happen, it probably wouldn't happen now, but with all the new changes and laws and stuff. But we were reading a book by George Couros about and I can't remember the name of it right now. But in it, we were in our little reading groups, and one of the things was, if there was something that you could do, a class you could teach, something that you're passionate about that you would like to do it. And so I kind of used that as leverage, because we changed up our scheduling, and we got rid of that American novel class, and we were adding advanced stuff. And I just said, hey, why don't I'm going to have this open class period in second semester, and I already have all of these books. because I just kept buying like class sets, like 4 or 5 copies of March, 4 or 5 copies of Persepolis, of Mouse. Whenever I went to half price books, I just buy a couple copies of all of these different ones. And I thought, you know what, I could have small lit circles. And so and I bought a bunch of the Odyssey, Gareth Hines, The Odyssey. Just
Yes.
I every time I just buy 5 or 6 of them, and The Watchmen. And I bought like a bunch of the Watchmen. And I said, you know, right now I have enough American Born Chinese, all of these things that I could do something with these. And they're mostly memoir based and that kind of stuff. And I said the school wouldn't have to buy anything. I'll just bring my stuff in. I'll bring in what I have and I'll do this. And he was like, you know what? Okay. And I was like, awesome. So I was really fortunate. And the first year I had 18 kids sign up for it, which I was like, I could only really do 16. But I had 18 and I had a couple IEP kids in there. And one of the kids, like, I tried to get them to read like almost 10 books for the whole semester, right? Kind of like 2 weeks at a time for each one. And we had projects and stuff. And then we kind of ended with The Watchmen, which was a beast. Like that was, we haven't really done that one again. There's a lot in there.
That's yeah.
But it there was one kid in there, he goes, I read 4 books. And he goes, I haven't read a book since 4th grade all the way through. And I gave him like a Subway gift card,
Oh,
like $5 gift card that I'd gotten. I was like, here, you deserve this, you know. Because I was like, he actually read it. Like he actually read these things. And I it really kind of opened up my eyes to go, you know, how else can I incorporate these things into the classroom? And then it was like a couple years later, maybe 1 or 2 years later, I did a classroom set of Gareth Hines' The Odyssey, and I started teaching the Odyssey through that instead. So, and then I just kind of, you know, there's one of the things in your book, which is the Star Wars Stormtrooper argumentative lesson, and I use that for the kids who have never done that right before we did the Odyssey, and so that they got used to reading graphic novels and then writing argumentatively. And so that's kind of how the whole thing came about. But I really had to be very specific. We are a standards-based grading school, and so I had to say, these are the standards we're covering. These are the assignments that we're doing. This is how I'm incorporating 21st century skills and discussion and collaboration and all that stuff too. So
wow. That's a lot. I mean,
yeah,
that's
that was a lot. Sorry.
yeah. No. I mean, that's like the opening chapter of your book, I think, that you need to write.
Yeah, maybe.
But no, I mean, for people who are listening, because people say it all the time, like, well, how do I get started? Where do I start? And that's kind of where it is. You bring in a couple of things, and then you see how much the kids love these things, and you're like, oh, if I could just do this, if I could just do that. For me, like, I don't teach a comic book course, but I'm lucky to work in a district where we have common assessments, but how we
Mhm.
get there, we have a lot of leeway as individual teachers. And so I can
Yeah,
do what I do without inconveniencing other teachers who don't necessarily do the same thing. And I think that's okay. Um,
right.
so I had to look up, because when you said George Koros, and there's a story, but it's the innovator's mindset. Uh,
Yes, that's
yes.
it. I
So,
couldn't think of it.
so the first time I presented for Pennsylvania for the Department of Education at their conference years ago, he was the keynote speaker, and they had a copy of one of his books, his great book, for everybody there. And then my session was up against his session.
Oh, geez.
And so I had a few people who were great who came. So George,
Yeah.
if you're listening, one of my first times, I don't ever go up against George Kuros. That's a tough
Yeah.
job. But no, it's just that, right? It's getting that permission to follow that.
Mhm.
And I think for me, for years, I wish I could go back and talk to my younger teacher self and say, yeah, like, do these things, do what you're passionate about, because it does translate to the kids. And then the only other thing that I'll comment with that is, like, when we read the March graphic novels, I have 11th grade students tell me the same thing, that in some cases it's the first book that they've ever read all the way through. And like, and those are my like, listen, I'm going to tell you something. Like, I'm going to be honest here. I've never read a whole book all the way through.
Yeah.
And then for other kids, it's like you said, oh, I haven't read a book since fourth grade. Oh, I haven't done this. Like I did the reading logs, and I answered the questions, and I did what I had to do. But these are the books that I really, really, really wanted to read. And so that we wind up reading the second book, and then the third book, and then we read Run, and then they want to learn more about the civil rights movement and all those things. And then I also appreciate that you understand that you have to teach the kids how to read a graphic novel.
Yeah.
Because we can lose kids that way if we just
Right.
assume, because I have kids who have never read a comic before.
Right.
Yeah, and so we have to slow down a little bit and teach them how to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we do the whole class, one for the Odyssey as freshmen, yeah, I go through, I don't know, I got something off Teachers Pay Teachers one time about how to do all the, how to read it. And it was just a very basic lesson in speech bubbles and thought bubbles and whispers and all of that stuff. And just kind of the terminology and all of that. And we don't go into like the huge in-depth stuff like we do in the the modern graphic novel elective, but enough that they can read it and understand. And then what I do is I supplement it with actual, texts from the Odyssey. So they're still having to struggle with the original text. But what I love about Gareth Hines' Odyssey, especially, is when you're reading from the textbook, you don't get that Athena is disguising herself as these people. With his book, you can, because she's outlined in blue. And so anytime she jumps into or shapeshifts into somebody else, that person is suddenly outlined in blue. And you go, wait a minute, wait, that's Athena, where you wouldn't pick up on that if you're just reading it, because they call them by whatever name the person is. And so you're like, why is this guy saying this stuff? So that is something that I have found is very beneficial, is having that second, that supplementary aspect of it, where kids can actually see it, especially those kids who can't visualize. And if they can't visualize grade level text that is in their own language, or their vernacular, or how they actually speak, they're definitely not going to be able to understand Homer, or Shakespeare.
Yep.
And so I think it's important that I still give them that stuff, and they have to struggle with it. They have to find the stuff, and we do that close reading of it, but they still are getting the story and the lessons from it.
Yeah, there again, there's a text-to-text comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, standards based and everything else. I mean, literally, and I show people this all the time. In Common Core standards, it actually says the words graphic novels.
Yeah.
In the text-to-text. And so I always say, if you're struggling with an administrator or a parent, like if you're a standards-based system and you're not using graphic novels, technically you're not actually following Common Core in a sense, right? Yeah.
Well, and especially the standard, I think it's 7 for the reading literature, or maybe it's either 7 or 9, but it's the comparing two types of literature of the same subject matter. And so when in my graphic novel class, we use that standard a lot, because we're comparing all of these memoirs together, or we're comparing social issues in comics or in superhero comics. And so they're talking about the same subject matter, but in different mediums. And then it's not that, well, I showed you, we read the book and then I watched the movie, which is kind of the, where we typically go with that. But here we're actually using another literary medium to do it.
Perfect. Yeah, that was our text-to-text comparison growing up, was there's the movie, there's the book.
Yeah.
Right.
How was it different?
Yes. Or film strip, but I'm aging myself. So
yes, film strip. I totally understand.
I think you already touched on a lot of this. So if you can't add to it, that's fine. But one of the questions I kind of sent to you was, is there a specific favorite lesson or two, kind of an idea that sticks out to you with your kids?
Yeah, so actually last year, and I didn't get a chance to do it this year with my kids, but last year I tried a new thing where after we did our social issues in comics, and then we do a superhero unit, and then they kind of join those together and they do a project with that. I had them create their own superhero that fights against some type of injustice or social issue or something like that. And so they had all of these that they could choose from. It could be depression or suicide or mental illness or gentrification or just anything. And I did have some kids who did it. I can actually show you a thing if it's okay if I go ahead and share. Can I share my
Absolutely.
screen?
Are you able to?
Um, it says you've disabled participant
All
screen
right,
share.
so let me,
But so while you're doing that, I'll just kind of chat. But I had a kid who has um some Native American descent, like and I'm not sure how much, but enough that he could do this and not be offensive, right? So this was around the time, so like last spring we were talking about there was a lot of stuff in the news about the schools in Canada where they had found the bodies of all of the indigenous students and stuff. And so that was kind of predominant in his mind, I think, at the time. And I was during the memoir unit and during the social issues, I was looking for indigenous voices that maybe they could read some comics, because I also had a couple Latina um, girls. And so I had found a few different things like Grand Theft Horse. Is that what it's
oh,
called?
it's a great one.
Yeah, Grand Theft Horse and Rendezvous in Phoenix
Yep.
and Dark Room, I think is what it's called. But there were several that I found that were Latina Latino authors. But then we had it was not written by an indigenous person or a Native American person, but up in our northwestern Iowa, there was a Spirit Lake massacre that happened, and a guy up in this area wrote a book about it. But he said this is not your typical book where it's just from like he made it more accurate, where basically you got a lot more Native American side to it, even though it was written by a white person. And so he read this book, the student read this book, and he was very, very excited to do it. And so he created his superhero. And I really wish that I could find, let's see here if I can figure out how to share my,
Hopefully there's a, we'll figure it out. There's at the bottom, should say share screen. Hopefully I set it up for you.
yeah, let's see here. Oh, okay, hold on. Let me know if you can see anything. So can you see my screen?
Not yet.
All right. Can you see that? No?
Let's, here, let me, now try again. Maybe that'll do it.
All right, let's see here. But whoops. Oh. Oh no, did I lose you?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I think my, it should be set up on my end. I was
I
thinking,
lost my Zoom screen. Hold on.
it's like
Oh, there we
teaching
go.
2 years ago.
All right, let's see if I can share screen. Let's see. Allow Zoom. Oh, I got to hit a little button here. Okay, here we go. It's making me do all this stuff here.
No, that's all right. I should have had it set up at the
Oh,
beginning.
shoot.
So note to self, I'll do this in the beginning next time so we can all practice.
Let's see. Yeah, I don't think it's gonna let me do
No,
it. It was like I could quit Zoom. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that.
no, yeah, all
That's all right.
right.
Anyway, he created a Native American character. It was really, really cool. But it was like on a horse. He used a Hero Forge to do it. So it was like if he wanted to, he could have like ordered his little minifig for stuff. But he did that, and I had several other kids. One did like, well, I also told them that they could do a villain, which I probably shouldn't have done
Yeah.
because really the social issue is the villain in this case. But I did have one that was like she made a this a superhero that was like or not a superhero, he was a villain. And I had several who did like anxiety and depression was the villain, and it was just so mind like eye-opening because so many kids were still just kind of with this whole um COVID thing. uh they were still struggling with a lot of that kind of stuff. So having the bad guy too still was okay, but if I did it again, it'd just be a superhero to combat the issue. And what are they going to do? But there was one who was it was toxic masculinity man. he was he was the villain, but that one was funny. And she had him dressed in like all this stuff that would have made him feel really, really uncomfortable because that was his weakness, was that he but I thought that was pretty funny, the toxic masculinity man.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, I like doing those kinds of projects with kids, and having them explore kind of um their just a deeper look into things. One another thing that I do is after our memoir unit, they read several together, so that they're all reading about the same four or five, and then I let them choose one of the many that I have off my shelf. And then what they have to do is they have to take the one of their choice, the graphic novel of their choice, and one that we read before, and they have to they can choose three different scenarios. One is to pick a character that was a minor character in their choice novel and then tell the story from their perspective. I had somebody do the friend of Jarrett Krajashka's Hey Kiddo. It was his friend telling it from his perspective of how he saw Jarrett. And
Wow.
it was that they really did a good job. And then what they do is they take some of the artwork or some of the maybe even some of the pages, and then they kind of rewrite the text from that person's perspective, or they redraw it or whatever, or they use storyboard that or something like that. And then they or that was one choice. Another choice is that they can take their choice novel and let's say Mouse, and they take the two main characters and they switch places. And how would that person what would they do? How would they react in the setting of Mouse? And how would Vladik react in the setting of Persepolis or whatever. And then the other one, the last one, which no one's really taken me up on yet, which is they take three graphic novels. One of them is their choice, and they have like Marjane Satrape and Jarrett Krajashka, and they meet in Pride of Baghdad or something, like, and then how would they interact with each other? How would they, so just seeing if they can understand the characters and who they are and what they would do. And so one time a student took Yummy and put him in Jarrett's life,
Wow.
and Jarrett in Yummy's life, and how would that have been different for them? Where now Yummy has a family that is actually caring for him. His the grandmother is taking care of him and doing that. But Jarrett's growing up in a place where his grandmother's overwhelmed because she's got all the grandkids because the parents are in jail, So it was just kind of interesting to see how they interpret those situations.
And I think the key word out of all that amazing stuff you just said is the word explore. Like you're letting the kids find their voice, explore things in different ways, tell stories, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I'm like sitting here taking notes myself, which is again the beauty of, I think, allowing teachers, hopefully as this series continues through the summer, of educators and librarians and folks getting to share the things that, because we learn the best from each other, and it's why I love going to conferences, because, and that's going to lead
Yeah.
to the next question is, I have notebook upon notebook upon notebook from conferences. It is I mean, Comic Cons for me have been some of the best professional development as an educator, and it's a hard sell sometimes to administrators. I'm like, no, 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 like here's all the things I learned, and
Yeah.
we're talking about just comics. So we had talked a little bit before we started live tonight. So you had just presented in Iowa. Could you talk a little bit about, because I know that's always a big question for folks, is like, how do I present? What do I do? What's that process like? Could you describe a little bit about how that process, what you got out of it, how you got involved with it, and maybe some advice you might have for others looking to share their voices too?
Yeah, so I was on Facebook and I happened to see that Des Moines had a Comic Con and I was like, whoa, that's new. And then I found out, well, it's only their second year. And they had this weird like thing that popped up. Hey, if you have any ideas for panels, fill out this Google form and we'll see. So I had contacted Tim and Michael and some other friends. I was like, what do I, I don't even know what I would present. Like, I want to do this, but and so through networking on comic book teachers Facebook group and other things, we are LitX cohort and that kind of stuff. I they sent me, hey, here's some ideas, and I picked a couple of them and I filled them out. And Michael had said, just do two. Don't fill out more than two because you don't want to look thirsty. And so I did that, and so I just kind of picked. I In Iowa right now we have some legislation that was just passed about banning books. So I thought, let's do one on censorship. Maybe I won't lose my job. And then we and I did one on, because SEL is a really big hot topic right now for everybody, and it's been a big issue in our state as well. Let's get rid of it, and that kind of stuff. But so I did one about finding solace in comics, and so some of them were basically already written out panel ideas that had been done before, but I just used that as my framework and then sent in my thing and waited to hear back. And then I didn't hear back, but then found out I was presenting the day of, and went down there and did it. But so yeah, I did one on finding solace in comics, social emotional wellness through reading comics, and then I did navigating the sea of censorship in comics in the school and the community. And so those were my two panels, and just kind of just talking about what I do, and why it's important for us to have comics for people, and how you can relate to those things. So that's kind of how I did it. I'm still looking for opportunities. While I was there, when I wasn't presenting, I went down and on the main floor and um, just kind of networked and found some local people who are actually not far from where I live, and said, hey, would you mind talking to my students, or would you, um, what are you doing, and all that stuff. So um just kind of finding people and talking to people, and then whenever I'm at any of my other duties that I do um at like the high school speech association. I'm vice president of our district in Northwest Iowa, and so talking to those people, and they're like, oh, that sounds so interesting, hey, can you tell me more about that? And maybe we should have you speak at our speech convention. And I'm like, but that has nothing to do with speech. And they're like, yeah, but it give us a good reason to say, hey, I could go for this PD thing and justify it. And I was like, okay, so talking to our area education agency, seeing if they have any workshops or that kind of stuff. That's, I mean, just kind of throwing things out there, like, I don't know, like, and then hope they bite and then say, hey, so I know the convention people, I was like, hey, can I get on for next year? And they're like, well, you have to go through the process again, but we definitely give first dibs to people that we've had do stuff before, so definitely make sure. And hey, we have one in Minnesota coming up, would you like to be able to go? Or we would love to have you come and do that one. And I'm like, yeah. And then I was like, oh, I can't, because that's the weekend of fall play that I'm also directing, because small school and I do everything.
Yeah.
And I can't say no.
Right. Oh, that is so hard as a teacher sometimes.
I
Yeah.
know.
Ugh, the guilt.
I know, all the conferences, all the things I want to do, they're at the same time as everything else.
Yes. Um, so just to pitch that one again, you said the Facebook group that we're both members of. Um,
Mhm.
it's terrifying to do these things, especially if you're just starting out. But like you said, there's lots of us out there now to help, and these resources
Yeah.
weren't there years and years and years ago. But it's called Comic Book Teachers. So if you look that up on Facebook, Comic Book Teachers, it's a private group. I mean, we let everybody in, but
Yeah.
and that's what we do. We share titles, we share resources. It's a way to find other people out there, because you could be in, a small town somewhere or a large city somewhere, or like me in a district where nobody else really does what I do. And that's okay. But then there are a lot of us out there who do these things. And so I've managed to meet educators from literally around the world through social media. And so we bounce ideas off of each other. And then, like you said, too, talking with illustrators and authors and publishers. I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of times we're kind of beaten down as educators that we're just teachers. But
Mhm.
you might be surprised at how much people really care, and are impressed that their work's being used in a classroom. Like they're like, oh, I was on this list and I made that list. And wait, you're using this in your classroom? Like, how can I help?
Yeah.
And people are really kind to talk with us about that.
I know when I was going to teacher school, we were reading I don't even remember what book it was, but it was one of my textbooks, and it had this guy named Chris Wilson in it. And he was, I think it was Reading with Pictures. He was part of that group. And um I contacted him on Facebook, and I looked at his stuff. It was a website that he had. And then that's, yeah, yes. And I went into that website, and I got a ton of stuff, and that's where I got a lot of the stuff about justifying my modern graphic novel class. And I became friends with him. And then I said something about on there on his page about using Gene Yang's book, American Born Chinese, in the classroom. And Jean responded and was like, thank you for inviting me to my class. And I was like, whoa, like, to me, that was like a celebrity moment. I was like, oh
Uh-huh.
my gosh. And I was just really excited about that. And then I think through Chris is how I found out about comic book teachers. And then, I think I saw your website, History Comics.
Done.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And just all the different comic book teacher and all of those guys, like Eric Callenborn and Michael Gianfrancesco and all of those guys. There's you build it's a community, and then you can build off of that and meet some really just great people who are passionate about teaching kids, and then just networking. I know I was like looking for something, and it was maybe a couple years ago, maybe 2019 or something. And I don't even remember the name of the guy, but he did this whole like social issues in comics PowerPoint presentation, and I use it all the time. And then I was having trouble like with it, like it was glitching on me for some reason. And so I was like, oh man. So I found him on Teachers Pay Teachers, and he's on You Shall Pass, I think is the name. And it's done so well. I went ahead and I paid I think it was $5. I'm like, I'm gonna pay for this so I can get it updated if I need to. And I use his stuff all the time. And so I wouldn't have found that if I hadn't found him on there. And so there a lot of times we give our stuff for free, and other times we sell stuff, and we but yeah, there's a lot of there's another guy, David Ricketts, who he does like Shakespeare little comic strips and grammar studies and stuff like that you can buy, and it's all original stuff. But yeah, I would say that you've got a lot of people who are just really genuine, Caribbean and Learner and Krajashka, all of these guys, they're just down to earth guys.
Yeah. I just because Jarrett Lerner, I love Jarrett Lerner, and JJK, Jarrett Kozowski and everything, but Jarrett Lerner just has out a new book, A Work in Progress.
Yes, I saw that.
So it's like it's a lot of prose, and it's poetry, and he plays with the words, but then also in typical Jarrett fashion. And it's a graphic memoir. I don't even know what to call it. It's a prose book, but it's graphics, but it's illustrated. But it's about an eating disorder and how he was bullied growing up. And and JarrettLerner.com, there's a lot of free activities and comics and things that he shares too.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that was
I was just gonna say, I want to be cognizant of your time. We're heading up to about an hour now.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, again, I say this all the time. We could talk about this for hours. I've done 3-hour workshops, but that's still not enough time sometimes. But if you could just, and you already mentioned so many great titles, so if you don't have any others to add, and I'll never ask you your favorite title. I hate when people ask me.
Oh, I know, it's so hard. Kids do that to me all the time. They're like, "What's your favorite?" I'm like,
right. Or who's your favorite superhero?
Well, Wonder Woman. She's probably my favorite. But yeah, there's so many. Like, how do you? It's like picking a favorite child. Now, I only have one child, so that one's easy for me. But
right. But are there other titles that?
Yeah. So this one, Animal Castle, is my new project. I am trying to come up with I'm trying to create like lesson plans for it. I'm just like, there's so much in here that you could do with this book. The vocabulary alone in this book is amazing. I think on one page there was like remuneration and like meager, and there was just a bunch of words that I was like, I don't even know if I know what remuneration is. but it's really well done, and it just ends so abruptly, just like Animal Farm does, but that's the point, it's kind of I wouldn't say a sequel, but it kind of is, but written by these French people. So, but really, really great book. I would say I really like the Zucker Press books. They have all sorts, they're all written by actual kids, students. And this one's about suicide. There's one that's about a transgender kid. There's ones about having an autistic brother. There's one about bullying, cyberbullying, and all sorts. I think there's 10 or 11 titles. Those are really great. Eat and Love Yourself and The Dark Matter of Mona Starr. Excellent books. The DC, it used to be DC Inc. Now I think it's just DC comic graphic novels for young adults or something ridiculous. But those are always really, really good. The Harley Quinn ones about gentrification, and there's all these idioms that she messes up and allusions that you could teach. Of course, there's the Octavia Butler's Kindred. This was so good. I have not read the actual book. The Busier I Become. the more graphic novels I read, because I can sit down and I can get them read and I'm still getting the same story. Of course, Speak by Laura Halls Anderson, Tempest Tossed by Laura Halls Anderson. This I had because we did a dystopian unit. And I had a kid who's like, I think I want to read 1984. And I was like, are you sure? Because that's a hard book. And I said, well, I do have the graphic novel. And he looked through it and he goes, you know what? I think I want to read the actual book. And he did an awesome job. But I did have it available if they wanted it. And then I just think these Wonder Woman historias are so beautiful. The art it's just amazing. I kind of wish that I could get comic book bags for these because they're gorgeous. But yeah, so I'm working on right now, because I know this was one of the other questions, is like, what are my next projects? So my next big project is getting back on TikTok and doing some more book talks. I kind of get in my head before I do it, and I have like big anxiety before I film, and then I have to go and stop I'm like, and I'm always afraid that I'm going to get the information wrong in the book and that somebody's going to like troll me, which has never happened yet. But yeah, I get all this anxiety about it. And then I just kind of, I can't. Well, I'm like, nobody wants to hear what I have to say about this stuff. So getting back on that. And then I'm also working on, and they're going to be on Teachers Pay Teachers, just because, I gotta make money to help my teachers pay teachers addiction. But I'm working on individual lessons for a graphic novel or for a graphic novel class that people can use for just like, hey, I need a lesson on graphic weight, and then here's some worksheets. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. Here's a plot diagram, and the things that I put together for like a lit circle packet when I do that, so that people can go, oh, this is how I can teach this stuff, or figurative language outside of just onomatopoeia in graphic novels. I mean, there's more to them than that. There's idioms and symbolism and foreshadow and flashback and extended metaphor that is, it's more than just pow zap kablooey. So
Yes.
yeah, and so those types of things, that's kind of what I'm working on right now, is just kind of making some materials that people can use in their class or supplement their classes with just regular stuff. So
That's great. And you can always use extra cash to buy more comics, right? It's always,
exactly.
yeah. When I look at how much extra I make every year, but then I look at how much I spend on comics, it never even,
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
it's
Yeah,
okay.
comics are, well, and every time I go to Half Price Books or Books A Million or Barnes and Noble, I'm always coming out with this big stack. Todd's like, what are you gonna do with those? And I'm like, they're going in my classroom. My kids saw I had I think it was, I don't know, maybe it was either, I think it was Eric Kallenborn or Michael Gianfrancesco. One of them a couple years ago did some giveaway on Twitter, and I won one for Leak by, I think it might be Carabine, I mean, I'm not sure. I can't remember. But and it was signed and by the artist and sent to me. And one of the kids in my class, they were reading it for the social issues thing, and they're like, this is signed by the author. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, why do you have it here? And I'm like, so you can read it. Like, and then I got Jarrett's new book, Sunshine, and and I was opening it. I'm like, oh, it's signed. I forgot when I pre-ordered it, I got it signed. And so they were like, oh, you shouldn't have those here. I'm like, you never take anything to school that you don't expect to get ruined or stolen.
And people say that to me all the time, like, "Oh, you're crazy." And I'm like, "No, once the kids know that you're willing to share and you trust them, I've
Yeah.
I've never had a problem in all the years that I
Yeah.
let kids borrow books or read my books. It hasn't been a problem. And I would say, just because I have to, it's just sitting right here. But Jared Kadaska's Sunshine. So reread Hey Kiddo
Oh, yes.
in my Project Lit course, and he mentions this camp that he goes to, and this is his experiences at this camp where kids and families, with kids who are going through cancer, and is one of the most amazing, most heartfelt, most inspirational stories. And it's a fantastic audiobook. And I also got to see him in person, gosh, just a couple weeks ago, and
Oh,
they
wow.
read. He just went around to different high schools, and the kids would meet him like that day, and they would read the script with him, and they would put images up on. I've never seen anything like it. So it was like a play of a graphic novel, of a memoir, of a, like, it was just fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I love that we're sharing all these titles, because
I will say that Hey Kiddo is one of my students' favorite books. It's also been challenged here in Iowa. Last year, it was being challenged by the Urbandale School District. A parent was upset with the language in it, which I was like, there's language in there? And then I went back and read it and I was like, oh yeah, I guess there is. But like I've heard worse in the hall in the senior hallway, so, but I've had a girl last year. She's on an IEP. She read really low reader. And she was reading it. And when she got done, she said, what the next book I read, can I just read this one again? And I said, no, you got to read the next one that we're going to do. And she was like, I wish that you could erase my brain so I could read it again for the first time.
Wow.
And I thought, wow. And then I had a kid this last year who read it and he said, this book is like my life. He lives with his grandparents. His mom has kind of been out of the picture. And he was like, this is exactly how I feel. Like, it's like my story. And I'm like, why are we keeping these stories away from kids who, it resonates so well with them. This is what they're living. And so you've said it many times that these books save lives, and because they see themselves, and that's so important.
And that's what Jarrett says. He goes, that was my experience. This is how I grew up. I didn't make this up. I'm not trying to,
Yeah.
what have you.
Yeah.
And we do have kids who are living through those experiences. I've read books as an adult that I wish were there when I was a kid. And you mentioned Speak. I love Sharon Laurie's Speak, because
Yeah.
people always say, wait a minute, there's a graphic novel. I'm like, yes, there's a graphic novel adaptation of it.
And honestly, I haven't read her actual book. I read that one instead.
Well,
because I had time.
I've read the prose many, many times. My wife and I actually wrote the teacher guide for it.
Yes. Yeah.
And there were things, particularly, I know people who know the book are going to laugh at me. I didn't pick up on the whole tree thing until I read the graphic novel and what that actually meant.
Yeah.
And I was like, I get it now. And that's the power of the visualizations.
Right.
Anyway, I could talk about these books for forever, but
Yeah. Yeah.
so that just about brings us to an hour, and I think that like I said, we could go for on and on and on. So I really appreciate you doing this with us tonight. And we'll share this on YouTube, and we'll share this down the road. And please, for people who are watching, and Ken, thank you for coming tonight too. Ken said he didn't have any questions, but if you do have questions down the road, reach out to us. Join the Comic Book Teachers Facebook group. If you just search Comic Book Teachers, you'll see the Facebook group. There's artists in there, there's authors in there, and there's a lot of us teachers and librarians in there, and we're there to help one another. And I think that's kind of what we came out of this whole conversation about, is Deb kind of felt on her own. I kind of felt on my own out here, but by meeting everybody else, and you mentioned a lot of great names like Michael, Rennell, Tracy Edmonds, like there's just so many fantastic people who are out there. And we help one another, and we inspire one another. And that's a fantastic thing. So Deb, I really appreciate you so much taking the time, taking an hour out of your night to kind of share what you're so passionate about.
Yeah, I love it. I even like right now I do an Upward Bound teach in the summer kind of thing for a couple weeks, and I'm even having kids right now do a whole graphic novel mini unit for the upperclassmen. They're reading some memoirs, so it's just really cool.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so
And I'd
much.
be happy to do this again, just
Yeah. And I think, so
talk
I'm gonna
about
put
like
this,
censorship or something.
yeah, no, I'm gonna put this out there. I was actually talking to Andrew Iden, who co-wrote the March graphic novels at the National Social Studies Conference in December. And I was saying, we need to have like a pop culture teacher convention. And I've talked to Eric Kallenborn about it. It's something in the back of my head. So I think whether it's a virtual thing, like I know they're reading with pictures, folks did that twice now, virtual conferences. And so
Yeah,
there's these opportunities. I think we'll start to see more and more of those. Uh,
yeah,
so
definitely.
I've got a bunch of buttons to push. So I'm going to hit stop recording.